Ji-hoon Park felt the neural connection burning in his mind like fire. As Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council, he had experienced thousands of these mental links before, but this one was different. This one hurt in a way that made his bones ache and his vision blur. The message came through clear and sharp, despite the pain. It was from Earth's Central Command, broadcast simultaneously to every human in the galaxy. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of finality. We withdraw. Consider this our final courtesy. Ji-hoon's hands shook as he disconnected from the neural link. Around him, the great council chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with the usual sounds of 100 different alien species conducting their daily business. None of them knew what had just happened. None of them understood that everything was about to change across the galaxy on the massive trade hub called Nexus Prime. Mireille Kim watched her communication screens with growing confusion. She had been monitoring human vessels and colonies for the past 3 years as part of her job as a communications officer. It was routine work, usually boring. Ships came and went, colonies sent their daily reports, and the great machine of galactic commerce kept turning, but today was different. Today, the signals were disappearing. At first, Mireille thought it was equipment failure. One by one, human colonies went silent. Ships stopped responding to traffic control. Space stations ceased their regular broadcasts. She ran diagnostic after diagnostic on her equipment, but everything checked out perfectly. The problem was not with her machines. The problem was that the humans were vanishing on the peaceful world of Kepler Prime. Elder Sunho Lee sat in his meditation garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. Sunho was not human, though he carried a human name. He belonged to the Villani, a species known for their love of peace and harmony. For decades he had been one of the few voices in the Galactic Council arguing for better relations with humanity. Most other species feared humans. They called them aggressive, unpredictable, dangerous. They said humans expanded too fast, invented too quickly, asked too many questions. But Sunho had worked with humans for 50 years. He knew they were different from what others believed. Humans were curious, yes. They were ambitious, certainly. But they were also generous with their knowledge, willing to help others, and surprisingly gentle when treated with respect. Sunho had tried to make others see this. But fear was stronger than reason in the council chambers. Now, as reports began reaching him about the human silence, Sunho felt a cold dread settling in his chest. He had seen this pattern before in historical records of other species. When a people felt unwelcome, when they were pushed too far, they sometimes chose to leave rather than fight, but humans leaving was different. Humans had become part of everything. Back on Nexus Prime, Mireille's confusion was turning to panic. She had expanded her scans to cover 3 entire sectors of space. Every human presence was gone. Ships, stations, colonies, all of them had simply disappeared from her sensors. Not destroyed, not damaged, just gone, she called her supervisor, a slug-like creature named Vorthak who had managed galactic communications for 2 centuries. Vorthak listened to her report with growing interest, his eye stalks twitching in a way that meant he was thinking hard. "Run the scans again," Vorthak ordered. "Check for debris fields, energy signatures, anything that might explain this." Mireille ran the scans 3 more times. Each time, the results were the same. Where human colonies had been yesterday, there was now empty space. Where human ships had traveled regular routes, there were now vacant shipping lanes. It was as if humanity had been carefully erased from the galaxy. In the Galactic Council chambers, news of the human disappearance was spreading quickly. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to discuss what this might mean. Memi seemed pleased. The Zephyrian Collective's ambassador actually smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Finally," the Zephyrian said, "the aggressive ones have removed themselves. Now we can have peace." But Ji-hoon, still recovering from the neural burn of that final message, knew better. He had been humanity's voice in these chambers for 10 years. He had listened to the complaints, the fears, the accusations. He had watched as species after species voted to limit human expansion. Restrict human trade and isolate human colonies. The humans had not left because they were defeated. They had left because they were tired of being unwelcome. You do not understand, Jihun said, his voice carrying across the chamber. This is not a victory. This is a catastrophe. The other ambassadors looked at him with confusion and some with irritation. A representative from the Rigel hegemony, a proud warrior species, laughed loudly. One human speaks of catastrophe because his people have fled, the Rigelian said. We see only the end of a problem, Jihun shook his head. You will see. In days, perhaps weeks, you will understand what you have lost. On a mining world called Kepler 442b, the first signs of that loss were already beginning to show. The massive extraction equipment that pulled precious metals from the planet's core had started making strange noises. Warning lights flashed on control panels that no one understood how to read. The equipment was human-designed, human-built, and human-maintained. The alien workers who operated it knew which buttons to push and which levers to pull, but they did not understand how any of it actually worked. They had never needed to. The humans had always been there to fix problems and explain systems. Now the humans were gone, and the machines were breaking down. Across the galaxy, similar problems were starting to appear. On agricultural worlds, irrigation systems designed by human engineers began to fail. On trade routes, navigation beacons maintained by human technicians started giving incorrect readings. In hospitals, medical equipment built with human technology showed error messages that no one could read. Elder Sunho Lee received these reports with a heavy heart. He had tried to warn the Council about this possibility. Humans had not conquered the galaxy through force. They had made themselves useful, even necessary. They had solved problems that others could not solve, built things that others could not build, and maintained systems that others could not understand. The galaxy had grown dependent on human knowledge and human innovation while simultaneously rejecting human presence. It was, Sunho realized, a contradiction that could not last forever. In her communication center, Mireille Kim finally found one last human signal. It was weak and distant, broadcast from a ship at the very edge of known space. The message was brief and recorded. To any who receive this transmission, the voice said, humanity thanks the galaxy for the lessons learned. We go now to places where our contributions are welcome. We leave behind no malice, only sadness for what might have been. The signal faded, and then there was only silence. Mireille sat back in her chair, understanding finally dawning on her. The humans had not been conquered or destroyed. They had been systematically pushed away by fear and prejudice until they decided to leave entirely. And in leaving, they had taken with them all the knowledge, all the innovations, and all the solutions that the galaxy had come to depend on. As night fell across Nexus Prime, emergency alarms began to sound in distant sectors. Equipment failures, system breakdowns, and communication blackouts were being reported from dozens of worlds. The great machine of galactic civilization was beginning to break down without the humans to maintain it. The silence of humanity was becoming very loud. Indeed, Haijin Choi stood in the middle of what used to be the most productive mining operation in the galaxy. 3 months had passed since the humans disappeared, and the massive extraction equipment around her was dying piece by piece. The warning lights had been flashing red for 2 weeks now. The deep core drills that could bore through solid metal like it was soft earth had stopped working yesterday. The ore processing plants that could turn raw rock into pure elements were making grinding noises that meant something inside was breaking apart. Haijin was the chief engineer for the operation, but that title meant less now than it used to. She was an alien, a member of the rock-eating granite people who lived naturally underground. Her species was perfect for mining work, but they had never needed to build their own machines. They had always just used human technology. We need to contact the human maintenance team, said Korvik, her assistant. He was young and still believed that solutions could be found easily. There is no human maintenance team, Haijin replied, her voice tired. There are no humans anywhere. They are all gone. The truth was starting to sink in across the galaxy. In the first days after the human departure, many species had celebrated. The Zephyrian Collective had thrown parties. The Rigel hegemony had declared it a victory for galactic security. Even some of the peaceful species had felt relief that the human problem was finally solved, but problems have a way of creating bigger problems on the other side of the galaxy. Wambin Nam sat in a detention cell and tried to explain to his captors that he could not help them. Wambin was one of perhaps a dozen humans who had been away from human space when the departure happened. He had been visiting the Zephyrian homeworld as part of a cultural exchange program. Now the Zephyrians wanted him to explain how human technology worked. They had dragged him to their greatest research facility and shown him rooms full of human-built machines that were breaking down. "You are human," said the lead Zephyrian scientist, a tall being with blue skin and too many arms. "You must know how these work." "I was a laborer," Wambin replied for the 20th time. "I studied law, not engineering. I can write contracts and argue court cases, but I cannot fix your machines." The scientist's eyes grew angry. "All humans know technology. This is what makes you dangerous." Wambam almost laughed, but the situation was too serious. "That is like saying all Zephyrians know how to breathe underwater because your homeworld has oceans. Humans are different from each other, just like your people are different from each other." But the Zephyrians did not want to hear this. They had built their entire understanding of humans on the idea that all humans were the same, all dangerous, all aggressive, all somehow magically good with technology. The truth that humans were individuals with different skills was too complicated for their fear-based thinking. Meanwhile, the galactic economy was beginning to shake like a building in an earthquake. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades were falling apart. Ships were getting lost because the navigation systems that humans had built and maintained were giving wrong information. Some ships had disappeared entirely in areas of space that used to be perfectly safe. Elder Sunho Lee of the Villani received daily reports about the growing crisis. Food shortages were beginning on worlds that had used human agricultural techniques. Medical centers were struggling as human-designed. Equipment failed without proper maintenance. Even simple things like waste recycling systems were breaking down. "We must try to contact them," Sunho told the Galactic Council during an emergency session. "We must ask the humans to return and help us." The response was not encouraging. The Rigel hegemony's ambassador stood up, his warrior's armor clanking as he moved. "We will not beg to those who abandoned us," the Rigelian declared. "We are strong. We will solve these problems ourselves." But strength meant nothing when dealing with problems that required knowledge instead of force. The Rigelians were excellent warriors, but they could not fight a broken water purification system or battle a failing power grid. Other species tried different approaches. The Andorian Trade Guild offered rewards for any information about human technology. The Crystal Singers of Vega attempted to use their psychic abilities to understand human machines by touching them. The Machine Collective tried to reverse engineer human devices by taking them apart. Nothing worked. Human technology was not just advanced, it was different. It was built on principles and theories that other species had never developed. Taking it apart only resulted in broken pieces that could not be put back together. The most disturbing discovery came from the Core World Security Division. They had been analyzing the patterns of system failures across the galaxy and found something that made their commanders lose sleep. The failures were not random. They were happening in a specific order, as if someone had planned them. Critical systems were failing first, followed by important but not essential systems, followed by convenient systems. It was like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. "The humans did not just leave," reported Commander Grix of the Security Division. "They planned this. They knew exactly what would happen when they departed, and they arranged it so that the most important systems would fail first." This revelation sent shockwaves through the galactic government. It meant that the human departure was not a sudden decision made in anger. It was a carefully planned operation that had probably been in preparation for years, back on the mining world. Haijin Choi was learning this lesson firsthand. As she studied the failing equipment more carefully, she realized that critical components had been quietly removed before the humans left. Not damaged, not broken, simply taken away. The humans had made sure that their technology could not be easily copied or repaired by others. They had built-in dependencies and safeguards that only they understood. And when they left, they had taken those secrets with them. "It's like they wanted us to fail," Korvik said as they watched another drill break down. "No," Haijin replied, understanding dawning on her. "They wanted us to learn what it feels like to need them." The first pirate. Attacks began in the 4th month after the human departure. For over a century, the galactic shipping lanes had been relatively safe. Pirates and raiders existed, but they were usually caught quickly by the early warning systems that monitored space traffic. Those early warning systems had been built and maintained by humans. Now, with the monitoring networks failing and security protocols breaking down, criminal organizations were realizing that opportunity was knocking. Ships began disappearing from trade routes. Colonies reported raids from unknown attackers. Even core worlds started experiencing problems with smugglers and thieves. The galactic military tried to respond, but they quickly discovered another problem. Much of their equipment had been upgraded with human technology over the years. Communication systems, targeting computers, even basic navigation tools were failing at the worst possible times. A Zephyrian patrol ship pursuing pirates found itself lost in space when its navigation computer crashed. A Rigelian battlecruiser discovered that its weapon systems would not fire because the human-built targeting system could not identify valid targets. Elder Sun Ho Lee watched these reports with growing sadness. He had spent his life working for peace and cooperation between species. He had believed that understanding and friendship could overcome fear and prejudice, but he had been wrong. The other species had not rejected humanity because humans were actually dangerous. They had rejected humanity because humans were different, and difference scared them. Now they were paying the price for that fear. The galaxy was discovering that diversity was not just morally right, it was practically necessary. Different species brought different knowledge, different perspectives, different solutions to problems. Humanity had brought innovation, problem-solving, and technological advancement. When the galaxy pushed them away, it had lost more than just one species. It had lost a way of thinking that had become essential to galactic civilization. In his detention cell, Wanbin Nam received news that the Zephyrians were finally willing to release him. They had realized that one human lawyer could not solve their technological problems. "Where will you go?" asked the scientist who had questioned him so many times. Wanbin looked out the window at the Zephyrian city beyond. The lights were dimmer than they used to be because the power systems were failing. The air smelled worse because the atmospheric processors were breaking down. "I will try to find my people," he said quietly, "if they will have me." The scientist's expression was unreadable. "Do you think they will return? Do you think the humans will come back to help us?" Wanbin considered the question carefully. "Would you return to help people who had treated you as unwelcome and dangerous?" The scientist had no answer for that question. 3 months after the human departure, the galaxy was beginning to understand what it had lost. But understanding and fixing were two very different things. "Sujin, you watched the patient die and knew there was nothing she could have done to save him." 6 months had passed since humanity's departure, and the Andromeda Medical Center was falling apart around her. She was the last human doctor in the facility, perhaps the last human doctor in this entire sector of the galaxy. The alien physicians around her were skilled and dedicated, but they were struggling with equipment they no longer understood. The patient had needed emergency surgery. But the surgical robot that could perform delicate operations inside a living body had malfunctioned halfway through the procedure. Error messages flashed on its screen in human writing that none of the alien doctors could read. The backup systems that should have taken over were also failing. "What does it say?" asked Dr. Vrelix, the head of surgery. He was a tall, thin being with 4 arms and enormous eyes that could see in multiple spectrums of light. His species had been performing surgery for thousands of years, but always with their own traditional tools. Sojin looked at the error message and felt her heart sink. It says the micro-manipulator array has detected an unknown obstruction and has shut down to prevent patient injury. Can you fix it? I'm a doctor, not an engineer, Sujin replied, echoing words she had heard from Wanbin Nam's situation reports. I know how to use this equipment, but I don't know how to repair it. This was the problem facing the entire galaxy. Human technology had been integrated into everything over the decades. It was not just that humans built good machines, it was that they built machines that worked together with alien systems in ways that no one else fully understood. The medical equipment was a perfect example. Human engineers had studied dozens of different alien physiologies and created devices that could work on any species. The surgical robots could automatically adjust their procedures for different body types. The diagnostic scanners could detect diseases in creatures they had never seen before, but when the equipment broke down, it required knowledge that only the humans possessed across the galaxy. Similar scenes were playing out in thousands of locations. On the military command world of Rigel Prime, Daeyun Kang was making discoveries that kept him awake at night. Daeyun was a military analyst, one of the few humans working in the Galactic Defense Forces. He had specialized in studying battle patterns and strategic threats. Now, as he reviewed decades of military records, he was uncovering the true scope of humanity's role in galactic security. The record showed something that no one had fully realized before. Every major threat to galactic civilization in the past century had been detected first by human scouts and explorers. The Void Raiders from the galactic rim had been spotted by human deep space patrols 6 months before they attacked the outer colonies. The plague ships that had tried to spread biological weapons had been intercepted by human research vessels who recognized the danger. Even the rogue AI that had tried to take over the communication networks had been discovered by human programmers who noticed unusual patterns in data flow. Humans had not just been traders and engineers. They had been the galaxy's early warning system, its immune system against threats from the unknown regions of space. They were our scouts, Daeyun explained, to a gathering of military commanders from various species. They went to places that the rest of us were too afraid to explore. They asked questions that the rest of us were too cautious to ask. When they found danger, they warned us. The commanders listened with growing alarm. General Thrak of the Rigel. Hegemony was the first to speak. Are you saying that threats exist that we do not know about? I'm saying that threats exist that we can no longer detect, Daeyun replied. The human exploration network extended far beyond official galactic borders. They had listening posts, research stations, and scout ships in hundreds of systems that don't appear on any of our star charts. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The galaxy had been protected by a security network that most people never knew existed. Now that network was gone and anything could be approaching from the dark spaces between stars, this fear became reality sooner than anyone expected. 3 weeks after Daeyun's briefing, the first pirate attack hit a core world. The raiders struck. The peaceful colony of New Harmony with precision and planning that suggested they had been watching and waiting for months. They disabled the colony's defenses, took what they wanted, and disappeared before any help could arrive. What made the attack truly terrifying was how easily it had been accomplished. The colony's early warning systems had detected nothing. The security satellites that should have spotted incoming ships had been blind. The automated defense platforms that should have responded to the attack had never activated. All of these systems had been built or upgraded with human technology over the years. All of them were failing at the worst possible time. It's like we've gone blind and deaf, reported Captain Yura of the Galactic Patrol. We can see what's right in front of us, but we can't detect anything coming from a distance. The attacks multiplied quickly. Pirate groups that had been quiet for decades suddenly became bold. Criminal organizations that had operated in the shadows began striking openly. Even some legitimate governments began expanding their territories. Knowing that the early warning systems that might have detected their military movements were no longer working, back at the medical center, Sujin Yu was dealing with the aftermath of one such attack. Injured refugees were arriving faster than the remaining functional equipment could treat them. "We need to set up manual surgical stations," she told the alien medical staff. "Use traditional tools and techniques." Dr. Vrelix looked worried. "We have not performed surgery without technological assistance in generations. Our skills with traditional tools are not sharp. Then we learn quickly or people die." Sujin replied bluntly. This was another problem that the galaxy was discovering. Dependence on human technology had not just made life easier, it had made other species forget their own traditional skills. Young doctors had trained only on human-designed equipment. Young engineers had learned only human-based techniques. Young soldiers had practiced only with human-improved weapons. When the human technology failed, entire generations found themselves without the basic skills their ancestors had possessed. On the research station orbiting Vega Prime, scientists were trying desperately to understand human technology by studying it piece by piece. They had collected broken human devices from across the galaxy and were attempting to reverse engineer them. The results were frustrating. Human technology was not just advanced, it was based on completely different principles from what other species used. Where alien engineers built systems that did one thing very well, humans built systems that could adapt and change. Where alien programmers wrote code that followed strict rules, humans wrote code that could learn and grow. "It's like trying to understand poetry by counting the letters," complained research director Zoltan. "We can see what the humans built, but we cannot understand how they thought." The most disturbing discovery came from the Computer Analysis Division. They had been studying the patterns of system failures across the galaxy and found evidence that the breakdowns were accelerating. "The failures are cascading," reported Chief Analyst Crix. "When one system breaks down, it puts extra stress on related systems. Those systems then fail faster, which stresses other systems. We are seeing an exponential increase in breakdown rates." The galaxy was not just losing human technology, it was losing the stability that human technology had provided. Systems that had worked reliably for decades were suddenly failing because they had been designed to work together with human systems that were no longer there. Elder Sunho Lee received these reports with a growing sense of despair. He had hoped that the galaxy could adapt to the human departure, that other species could learn to fill the gaps that humanity had left behind. But the gaps were too big and too complex. Humanity had not just provided technology, they had provided a way of thinking about problems that no other species possessed. They had been innovators, explorers, problem solvers, and bridge builders between different ways of doing things. In the Galactic Council chambers, arguments raged about what to do next. Some species wanted to send expeditions to find the humans and bring them back. Others insisted that the galaxy should solve its problems independently. A few radical voices even suggested that the crisis was temporary and that things would eventually stabilize, but privately, many council members were beginning to face a terrible possibility. Perhaps the galaxy could not function without humanity. Perhaps the fear and prejudice that had driven the humans away had also destroyed the foundation of galactic civilization. On his hospital rounds, Sujin Yu encountered a young alien patient who asked her a simple question that cut to the heart of the crisis. "Doctor," the child said, "why did the humans leave us?" Sujin looked into the child's innocent eyes and tried to find an answer. "That would not crush the young one's faith in the adult world, because we made them feel unwelcome," she said finally. "Because we were afraid of them instead of grateful for their help. Will they come back?" Sujin thought about all the broken equipment around her, all the failing systems across the galaxy, all the threats that were now approaching undetected from the... "Sujin, you watched the patient die and knew there was nothing she could have done to save him. 6 months had passed since humanity's departure, and the Andromeda Medical Center was falling apart around her. She was the last human doctor in the facility, perhaps the last human doctor in this entire sector of the galaxy. The alien physicians around her were skilled and dedicated, but they were struggling with equipment they no longer understood. The patient had needed emergency surgery. But the surgical robot that could perform delicate operations inside a living body had malfunctioned halfway through the procedure. Error messages flashed on its screen in human writing that none of the alien doctors could read. The backup systems that should have taken over were also failing. "What does it say?" asked Dr. Vrelix, the head of surgery. He was a tall, thin being with 4 arms and enormous eyes that could see in multiple spectrums of light. His species had been performing surgery for thousands of years, but always with their own traditional tools. Sojin looked at the error message and felt her heart sink. It says the micro-manipulator array has detected an unknown obstruction and has shut down to prevent patient injury. "Can you fix it?" "I'm a doctor, not an engineer," Sujin replied, echoing words she had heard from Wambin Nam's situation reports. "I know how to use this equipment, but I don't know how to repair it." This was the problem facing the entire galaxy. Human technology had been integrated into everything over the decades. It was not just that humans built good machines, it was that they built machines that worked together with alien systems in ways that no one else fully understood. The medical equipment was a perfect example. Human engineers had studied dozens of different alien physiologies and created devices that could work on any species. The surgical robots could automatically adjust their procedures for different body types. The diagnostic scanners could detect diseases in creatures they had never seen before, but when the equipment broke down, it required knowledge that only the humans possessed across the galaxy. Similar scenes were playing out in thousands of locations. On the military command world of Rigel Prime, Daeyun Kang was making discoveries that kept him awake at night. Daeyun was a military analyst, one of the few humans working in the Galactic Defense Forces. He had specialized in studying battle patterns and strategic threats. Now, as he reviewed decades of military records, he was uncovering the true scope of humanity's role in galactic security. The record showed something that no one had fully realized before. Every major threat to galactic civilization in the past century had been detected first by human scouts and explorers. The Void Raiders from the galactic rim had been spotted by human deep space patrols 6 months before they attacked the outer colonies. The plague ships that had tried to spread biological weapons had been intercepted by human research vessels who recognized the danger. Even the rogue AI that had tried to take over the communication networks had been discovered by human programmers who noticed unusual patterns in data flow. Humans had not just been traders and engineers. They had been the galaxy's early warning system, its immune system against threats from the unknown regions of space. "They were our scouts," Dayan explained, to a gathering of military commanders from various species. "They went to places that the rest of us were too afraid to explore. They asked questions that the rest of us were too cautious to ask. When they found danger, they warned us." The commanders listened with growing alarm. General Thrak of the Rigel. Hegemony was the first to speak. "Are you saying that threats exist that we do not know about?" "I'm saying that threats exist that we can no longer detect," Daeyun replied. The human exploration network extended far beyond official galactic borders. They had listening posts, research stations, and scout ships in hundreds of systems that don't appear on any of our star charts. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The galaxy had been protected by a security network that most people never knew existed. Now that network was gone and anything could be approaching from the dark spaces between stars, this fear became reality sooner than anyone expected. 3 weeks after Daeyun's briefing, the first pirate attack hit a core world. The raiders struck the peaceful colony of New Harmony with precision and planning that suggested they had been watching and waiting for months. They disabled the colony's defenses, took what they wanted, and disappeared before any help could arrive. What made the attack truly terrifying was how easily it had been accomplished. The colony's early warning systems had detected nothing. The security satellites that should have spotted incoming ships had been blind. The automated defense platforms that should have responded to the attack had never activated. All of these systems had been built or upgraded with human technology over the years. All of them were failing at the worst possible time. "It's like we've gone blind and deaf," reported Captain Yura of the Galactic Patrol. "We can see what's right in front of us, but we can't detect anything coming from a distance." The attacks multiplied quickly. Pirate groups that had been quiet for decades suddenly became bold. Criminal organizations that had operated in the shadows began striking openly. Even some legitimate governments began expanding their territories. Knowing that the early warning systems that might have detected their military movements were no longer working, back at the medical center, Sujin Yu was dealing with the aftermath of one such attack. Injured refugees were arriving faster than the remaining functional equipment could treat them. "We need to set up manual surgical stations," she told the alien medical staff. "Use traditional tools and techniques." Dr. Vrelix looked worried. "We have not performed surgery without technological assistance in generations. Our skills with traditional tools are not sharp." "Then we learn quickly or people die," Sujin replied bluntly. This was another problem that the galaxy was discovering. Dependence on human technology had not just made life easier, it had made other species forget their own traditional skills. Young doctors had trained only on human-designed equipment. Young engineers had learned only human-based techniques. Young soldiers had practiced only with human-improved weapons. When the human technology failed, entire generations found themselves without the basic skills their ancestors had possessed. On the research station orbiting Vega Prime, scientists were trying desperately to understand human technology by studying it piece by piece. They had collected broken human devices from across the galaxy and were attempting to reverse engineer them. The results were frustrating. Human technology was not just advanced, it was based on completely different principles from what other species used. Where alien engineers built systems that did one thing very well, humans built systems that could adapt and change. Where alien programmers wrote code that followed strict rules, humans wrote code that could learn and grow. "It's like trying to understand poetry by counting the letters," complained research director Zoltan. "We can see what the humans built, but we cannot understand how they thought." The most disturbing discovery came from the Computer Analysis Division. They had been studying the patterns of system failures across the galaxy and found evidence that the breakdowns were accelerating. "The failures are cascading," reported Chief Analyst Crix. "When one system breaks down, it puts extra stress on related systems. Those systems then fail faster, which stresses other systems. We are seeing an exponential increase in breakdown rates." The galaxy was not just losing human technology, it was losing the stability that human technology had provided. Systems that had worked reliably for decades were suddenly failing because they had been designed to work together with human systems that were no longer there. Elder Sunho Lee received these reports with a growing sense of despair. He had hoped that the galaxy could adapt to the human departure, that other species could learn to fill the gaps that humanity had left behind, but the gaps were too big and too complex. Humanity had not just provided technology, they had provided a way of thinking about problems that no other species possessed. They had been innovators, explorers, problem solvers, and bridge builders between different ways of doing things. In the Galactic Council chambers, arguments raged about what to do next. Some species wanted to send expeditions to find the humans and bring them back. Others insisted that the galaxy should solve its problems independently. A few radical voices even suggested that the crisis was temporary and that things would eventually stabilize, but privately, many council members were beginning to face a terrible possibility. Perhaps the galaxy could not function without humanity. Perhaps the fear and prejudice that had driven the humans away had also destroyed the foundation of galactic civilization. On his hospital rounds, Sujin Yu encountered a young alien patient who asked her a simple question that cut to the heart of the crisis. "Doctor," the child said, "why did the humans leave us?" Sujin looked into the child's innocent eyes and tried to find an answer. That would not crush the young one's faith in the adult world, because we made them feel unwelcome, she said finally. Because we were afraid of them instead of grateful for their help. Will they come back? Sujin thought about all the broken equipment around her, all the failing systems across the galaxy, all the threats that were now approaching undetected from the... Soman Park had never imagined she would become the governor of a dying world. 2 years had passed since humanity's departure, and Epsilon Eridani was slowly starving to death. The colony had once been a jewel of galactic civilization, home to 30 million beings from a dozen different species. It was a trading hub, a cultural center, a place where different peoples came together to build something greater than the sum of its parts. Now it struggled to feed 10 million survivors. The latest supply shipment is 3 weeks overdue, reported. Her chief of staff, a nervous Rigelian named Vex who had not slept properly in months. The shipping companies say they cannot guarantee safe passage through the outer systems. Soman studied the holographic display that showed supply routes throughout their sector of the galaxy. Once, those routes had been protected by a network of early warning stations, patrol ships, and communication relays. Most of that network had been built or maintained by human technology. Now it was failing, and the spaces between worlds were becoming dangerous again. What about the agricultural systems? She asked. Vex's expression grew even more worried. Hydroponic farms are operating at 60% capacity. We lost another processing plant yesterday when the nutrient recyclers broke down. The human-designed atmospheric processors that make our soil fertile are showing stress fractures. The numbers were devastating, but they only told part of the story. Epsilon Eridani had been designed to support its population, using advanced systems that maximized efficiency and minimized waste. When those systems started failing, there was no backup plan. No one had thought a backup plan would ever be needed. This was the pattern playing out across the galaxy? Worlds that had flourished using human innovations were discovering that they could not simply return to older, less efficient methods. They had grown beyond what traditional technologies could support. On the other side of the galaxy, Kyomino was documenting the collapse of interstellar commerce. As a trade coordinator for the Galactic Commercial Alliance, he had spent his career managing the flow of goods between worlds. Now he was watching that flow slow to a trickle. The quantum communication network is down in 7 sectors, he reported to the Alliance's Emergency Council. Ships are losing contact with their destinations mid-journey. Some have been missing for weeks. The quantum communication system had been one of humanity's greatest gifts to galactic civilization. It allowed instant communication across vast distances, making interstellar trade and governance possible. Now, as the human-built relay stations failed one by one, the galaxy was fragmenting. Without reliable communication, cargo ships cannot coordinate with spaceports, Kyungmin continued. They arrive to find their berths occupied or their cargo unwanted or their fuel supplies unavailable. Some captains have stopped taking long-distance contracts entirely. This was creating a cascade effect that Kyungmin had watched with growing horror. When ships stopped traveling to distant worlds, those worlds stopped receiving vital supplies. When supplies became scarce, prices increased. When prices increased, fewer people could afford goods, which meant less demand for shipping, which meant even fewer ships were willing to make dangerous journeys. The galaxy's economy was not just declining, it was collapsing in on itself. The situation was worst in sectors that had been heavily dependent on human agricultural technology. These worlds had been able to support populations far beyond what their natural resources should have allowed. Human biotechnology had created crops that grew in hostile environments, soil treatments that could make deserts bloom, and food processing systems that could turn almost anything organic into nutritious meals. When that technology began failing, the results were catastrophic. Min Hee-young was one of the few journalists still trying to document what was happening across the galaxy. Most news organizations had either collapsed or retreated to covering only local events as communication networks failed. But Min-hee was determined to record the truth, Even if few people would be able to read her reports. Her latest investigation had taken her to the Rigel hegemony, the proud warrior civilization that had been among the most vocal opponents of human presence in the galaxy. What she found there shocked her. The hegemony was falling apart. Entire sectors had declared independence as the central government lost the ability to communicate with and supply its outer territories. Some worlds had seen their populations revolt when living conditions became unbearable. Others had simply gone silent, cut off from the rest of civilization by failed technology and dangerous space lanes. The irony is bitter, Minhee wrote in her journal. The hegemony rejected humanity because they saw humans as a threat to their strength and independence. Now they are discovering that their strength was built on human foundations, and their independence was made possible by human innovations. On the hegemony's capital world, she interviewed citizens who were experiencing hardships they had never imagined possible. Food was rationed because the agricultural systems were failing. Power was limited because the energy distribution networks were breaking down. Transportation was difficult because the vehicles designed with human technology were becoming unreliable. Most disturbing of all, she discovered that some populations were beginning to worship humans as departed gods. They gave us plenty and we drove them away, an elderly Rigelian told her, his warrior's pride broken by desperation. Now they watch us from beyond the stars, judging whether we deserve their return. These cargo cults were forming throughout the galaxy. Desperate people were creating shrines around broken human technology, believing that proper worship might bring the humans back. Some groups had begun imitating human customs and behaviors, thinking that becoming more human-like might earn them salvation. The galactic government was struggling to maintain any kind of coherent response to the crisis. The Galactic Council still met, but its sessions had become exercises in finger-pointing and desperation rather than effective governance. We must send more expeditions to find the humans, argued the representative from the Andorian Trade Guild. We must offer them whatever they want to return. We cannot appear weak by begging, countered the Rigelian ambassador, though his own homeworld was struggling with massive supply shortages. We must solve these problems through our own strength. What strength? Demanded the Zephyrian delegate. Our technology fails more each day, our worlds grow hungry. Our people lose hope. What strength do we have left? Elder Sunho Lee listened to these arguments with growing despair. He had warned the council years ago that pushing humanity away would have consequences. Now those consequences were destroying everything he had worked to build, but the most chilling reports were coming from the outer rim of the galaxy, where human deep space monitoring stations had once kept watch for threats from unknown regions. Of space. Military analysts were detecting movement in the dark spaces beyond galactic borders. Unknown ships were probing the edges of civilized space. Some outer colonies had reported strange contacts, mysterious signals, and unexplained phenomena. The humans were our early warning system. Admiral Corex of the Galactic Defense Force told the Council in a closed session. They went to places we were afraid to go and watched for dangers we were too cautious to seek out. Now we are blind to what approaches from the darkness. The fear was not just that external threats might be approaching. The fear was that those threats might have been approaching for years, held back only by human vigilance and human willingness to face the unknown. Back on Epsilon Eridani, Soman Park made a decision that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. She ordered the evacuation of the outer settlements, concentrating the remaining population in areas where the failing life support systems could still function. We cannot support 30 million people anymore, she announced to her staff. We can try to keep 10 million alive. The evacuation was carried out with military efficiency, but it felt like surrender. Entire cities were abandoned. Industrial complexes that had taken decades to build were left to decay. Parks, schools, and cultural centers were sealed up, their contents left to wait for a future that might never come. As Salman watched the last transport ships carrying evacuees to the consolidated settlements, she wondered if this was how civilizations died. Not in fire and war, but in the slow realization that they could no longer sustain what they had built across the galaxy, similar decisions were being made. Colonies were being abandoned, trade routes were being closed, worlds that had been connected for centuries were losing contact with each other as the infrastructure that held galactic civilization together continued to fail. The cascade effect was accelerating. Each system that failed put additional stress on the remaining systems. Each world that went dark made it harder for the remaining worlds to support each other. Each broken connection in the network of galactic civilization made the entire structure weaker. In her final report before the communication networks failed completely in her sector, Min-hee Jung wrote words that would be remembered by historians as the epitaph of an era. We built our civilization on a foundation we did not understand, maintained by people we did not appreciate, protected by guardians we chose to fear. When we drove away those who sustained us, we discovered that our Gr. Seung-Wan Choi had been staring at the same code sequence for 6 hours, and his eyes were beginning to burn from the strain. 3 years had passed since humanity's departure, and he was part of a small group of codebreakers trying to decrypt the hidden messages that humans had left behind. The work was frustrating beyond description. Human programming was different from anything other species used. Where alien code followed rigid logical structures, human code seemed to flow like water, adapting and changing in ways that made it almost impossible to understand. But Seung-Wan was stubborn, and he had help from other beings who were equally determined to uncover the truth. There was Naeon Kim, a former human liaison who understood human thinking better than most aliens. There was Milla, a Zephyrian mathematician whose species excelled at pattern recognition. And there was Old Corton, a crystal-based life form whose long-term memory could hold vast amounts of data. Together, they had been working in secret, analyzing every piece of human communication they could find, looking for clues about why humanity had really left and where they had gone. "I think I've found something," Seung-Wan said suddenly, his voice tight with excitement. The others gathered around his display screen, where lines of human code scrolled past in patterns that seemed almost random, but buried within the apparent chaos was a structure, a hidden message that had been carefully woven into the fabric of the final transmission. "It's not just one message," Seung-Wan explained as he worked to extract the hidden data. "It's dozens of messages, layered one on top of another, all synchronized to be revealed only when analyzed together." As the decryption program ran, pieces of text began appearing on the screen. At first, they seemed disconnected, but slowly, a larger picture began to emerge. The truth was devastating. Humanity had not left suddenly in anger or fear. They had been planning their departure for decades, carefully preparing for the day when they would no longer be welcome in galactic civilization. "Look at this," Naeon said, pointing to a date stamp in one of the decoded messages. "This planning document is from 15 years ago. They've been working on this since before most of the current Galactic Council members were even elected." The documents revealed a systematic campaign of gradual withdrawal. For years, humans had been quietly reducing their dependence on galactic institutions while increasing other species' dependence on human innovations. They had built technology that only they could maintain, established trade relationships that could not easily be replaced, and created security networks that would fail without human oversight. They made themselves indispensable while preparing to disappear, Milla observed, her mathematical mind appreciating the elegant complexity of the plan. "They knew we would eventually push them away, so they arranged things so that our rejection would have maximum impact." But the documents contained something even more shocking. Humanity had not acted alone. They had been in secret contact with other species that existed beyond the known galaxy, in regions that the major galactic powers had never explored. "They were never just the species we knew," Corton realized, his crystalline form flickering with excitement. "They were part of a larger community, a network of civilizations that we never knew existed." The decoded messages revealed that humanity had been serving as ambassadors and scouts for this larger community, testing whether galactic civilization was ready to join a broader interstellar society. The treatment humanity received had been, in effect, a test of the galaxy's maturity and wisdom. The galaxy had failed that test spectacularly. We weren't rejecting just one species, Neon said quietly. We were rejecting membership in something much larger. Humanity was our chance to join a community of civilizations that spans multiple galaxies. The documents contained detailed plans for what humanity called the Great Withdrawal. It was not just about leaving galactic space. It was about demonstrating to the galaxy what it had lost through its fear and prejudice. Every system failure, every cascade effect, every crisis that had struck the galaxy since humanity's departure had been predicted and planned for. Humans had known exactly what would happen when they left, because they had carefully engineered the conditions that would make their absence catastrophic. They didn't just abandon us, Sungwon realized. They set up a learning experience. They made sure we would understand the full cost of our prejudice. The revelation was almost too much to process. For 3 years, the galaxy had been struggling with what it thought were unintended consequences of humanity's departure. In reality, every crisis, every failure, every catastrophe had been deliberately orchestrated to teach the remaining species a lesson about the value of cooperation and diversity. But the documents contained one more shock. Hidden in the deepest layers of encryption was a countdown timer, and it was approaching 0. What happens when it reaches 0? Milla asked. Sungwon worked frantically to decode the associated files. When the answer appeared on his screen, he felt his blood turn cold. A final phase, he read aloud. Complete communications blackout. All remaining human technology will cease functioning permanently. No possibility of recovery or reverse engineering. The timer showed 18 hours remaining. Neon immediately tried to contact the Galactic Council, but the communication networks were too degraded to reach the capital worlds. They could only send messages to local authorities, hoping that word would eventually spread. We have to warn everyone, she said desperately. If the remaining human technology fails completely, the effects will be catastrophic. But even as they worked to spread the warning, Sungwon continued decoding files. What he found next changed everything. The final shutdown was not just about ending human technological support. It was about clearing the way for something else, something the documents called the Return Protocol. They're not gone forever, he said, hardly believing what he was reading. This is temporary. When the countdown reaches 0, humanity will send a final message to the galaxy. If that message is properly received and understood, they might consider returning. What kind of message? Corton asked. Sungwon scrolled through the files, looking for details. It's not just a message. It's a test. The galaxy will have one chance to demonstrate that it has learned from the crisis, that it understands the value of diversity and cooperation. The documents were vague about what form this test would take, but they were clear about the consequences. If the galaxy passed the test, humanity would consider re-establishing contact. If it failed, humanity would disappear beyond the galactic rim forever, taking with them any chance of joining the larger interstellar community. 18 hours, Neon said, looking at the countdown timer. 18 hours to somehow communicate to the entire galaxy that this is all a test and that we have one final chance to prove we've learned our lesson. But the communication networks were failing. Most worlds could barely maintain contact with their immediate neighbors, let alone coordinate a galaxy-wide response. The very systems they needed to spread the warning were among those that would fail when the countdown reached 0. It's impossible, Milla said. Even if we could reach everyone, how do you teach an entire galactic civilization to change its fundamental attitudes in less than a day? Sungwon looked at the decoded messages one more time, searching for any clue about what humanity expected or wanted. Then he found it, buried in a subsection labeled Emergency Protocols. There's an override, he said. A way to send a message directly to humanity using the quantum communication relays that are still functioning. But it has to be a specific type of message, sent from a specific location at a specific time. What type of message? A formal apology? Not from governments or councils, but from individuals representing all the major species. An acknowledgement of what we did wrong and a promise to do better. The location was the ruins of New Geneva on Earth, the abandoned human homeworld. The time was exactly when the countdown reached 0. "We have to get there," Neon said immediately. "We have to try." But Earth was weeks away by conventional travel, and the hyperspace routes that might get them there quickly were failing as human navigation systems broke down. Even if they could reach Earth in time, there was no guarantee that the message would be received or accepted. "It might be our only chance," Sunwon said. "The only chance for the galaxy to avoid complete collapse." As they prepared to leave on what seemed like an impossible mission, Corton made one final observation that chilled them all. "Consider this carefully," the crystal being said. "Humanity planned all of this years in advance. They predicted our actions, our failures, our desperation. Do you really think they would leave our redemption to chance?" The question hung in the air as they raced toward a dying Earth, carrying with them the slim hope that 3 years of suffering might finally teach the galaxy what humanity had tried to show them all along. That survival required not just strength or intelligence, but wisdom enough to value what you have before you lose it, 17 hours and counting. Tae-Young Lim had never expected to become the emergency coordinator for the dying remains of galactic civilization. 4 years had passed since humanity's departure, and he was now responsible for organizing what might be the last coordinated effort the galaxy would ever make. The revelation about humanity's deliberate orchestration of the crisis had spread through the remaining communication networks like wildfire. Governments that had barely been able to maintain contact with their own worlds suddenly found ways to coordinate with each other. When faced with the possibility of complete technological collapse, "We have confirmed responses from 47 major worlds," reported his assistant, a young Vellani named Teeman who had been working without sleep for 3 days. "Most of the outer rim colonies are either unreachable or have already lost their major systems." Tae-Young studied the holographic display that showed the current state of galactic civilization. Red zones marked areas where communication had been lost entirely. Yellow zones indicated regions where basic systems were still functioning but degrading rapidly. Green zones, there were precious few of those, showed worlds that still maintained some semblance of normal operation. "What about the deep space probe data?" he asked. TAMIN activated another display. "We've located 14 probe transmissions that contain navigation data for regions beyond the galactic rim. 3 of them include what appear to be coordinates for the human settlements that Captain Shin discovered." The plan was desperate but simple. They would send a fleet to find humanity's new civilization and attempt to negotiate their return. Not as equals asking for help, but as former oppressors begging for forgiveness. It was humiliating. But humiliation seemed a small price to pay for survival. Junsong had been chosen to command the expedition. She was captain of the rebuilt exploration vessel Second Chance, a ship that represented the best efforts of the remaining galactic civilizations. Like the Harmony before it, the Second Chance combined technology from multiple species, but this time the combination was born of desperation rather than cooperation. "The ship is ready, Coordinator," Jun reported via Quantum Link. "We have representatives from 12 species aboard, including 3 who were part of the original anti-human faction in the Galactic Council. The journey to the coordinates took 3 weeks, during which the expedition members received daily updates about the continuing collapse of galactic civilization. Worlds were going dark permanently as their life support systems failed beyond repair. Trade routes that had operated for centuries were being abandoned as ships became stranded without functional navigation systems. Most disturbing were the reports of violence. As resources became scarce and governments lost the ability to maintain order, some species had begun fighting among themselves. The Rigel hegemony had fractured into warring factions. The Zephyrian Collective had seen entire sectors declare independence and stop sharing resources with the central government. "The galaxy is not just failing technologically," observed Dr. Vex, the expedition's sociologist. It is failing socially and politically. The bonds that held our civilization together were apparently more dependent on human influence than anyone realized. When they finally reached the coordinates beyond the galactic rim, what they found exceeded even their expanded expectations of human achievement. The space city that Captain Shin had discovered 1 year earlier had grown. What had been a single, massive structure was now a cluster of interconnected habitats, industrial complexes, and research facilities that stretched across millions of cubic kilometers of space. Ships moved between the structures in patterns that suggested a level of coordination and efficiency that made galactic traffic control look primitive by comparison. But this was not the most shocking discovery. As their sensors reached deeper into the region, they detected dozens of similar installations scattered throughout local space. Humanity had not just built one new colony, they had built an entire new civilization. How many people could these installations support? Asked Ambassador Crix, the Zephyrian representative who had once led the anti-human faction. June consulted her tactical officer's estimates. Conservative estimate? 200 billion. Optimistic estimate? 500 billion. The number was staggering. In 4 years, humanity had apparently grown their population far beyond what they had possessed within galactic space. Either they had achieved miraculous advances in reproduction and life extension, or they had been joined by others. "Captain," called the communications officer, "we're being contacted." The transmission that came through was professional and polite, but unmistakably firm. "Galactic Vessel Second Chance, you are approaching restricted space. Please state your purpose." Yoon took a deep breath before responding. "This is Captain Song of the Galactic Council Emergency Fleet. We request permission to meet with human leadership to discuss the current crisis in galactic space. Please maintain your current position while we consider your request." Hours passed before another ship approached them. This vessel was clearly human in design but far more advanced than anything humanity had possessed during their time in galactic space. Its hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and its propulsion system left no visible exhaust or energy signature when the airlocks connected. The being who came aboard was recognizably human, but somehow more than June remembered humans. Being, Houncho had grown in ways that went beyond physical changes. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had helped build wonders, and her eyes held depths that suggested she had seen things beyond the imagination of those left behind. "Captain Song," Hound said with polite courtesy, "I remember you from the diplomatic reports. You commanded a patrol vessel in the Vega sector, I believe." "You remember correctly." Administrator Cho, I was also one of the naval officers who voted to support restrictions on human expansion. Heian's smile was sad but understanding. "Yes, I know. We kept detailed records of all such votes. Please come with me. There are things you need to see before we discuss your request." The journey to the main human facility took several hours, during which June and her team saw wonders that redefined their understanding of what was possible. Entire asteroids had been converted into gardens that fed millions. Industrial complexes operated by artificial intelligences more sophisticated than any galactic computer-produced goods that seemed to reshape themselves according to need. Most impressive were the humans themselves. They moved with a purpose and confidence that June had never seen during their time in galactic space. Children played in parks that floated freely in vacuum, protected by energy fields that bent light into rainbow patterns. Adults worked on projects that involved manipulating matter at the quantum level, creating new materials and technologies that seemed to violate known laws of physics. "You've been busy," June observed. "We've been free," Hound corrected. "Free. To grow, to explore, to become what we were always capable of becoming. Within galactic space, we were constantly holding ourselves back, limiting our development to avoid frightening those who already feared us. They were taken to a facility that Hound described as a development center. Inside, humans were working, alongside beings that June had never seen before, tall, graceful creatures with crystalline skin, small furry beings with enormous eyes, and others that defied easy description. The broader galactic community, Hound explained. Species from other galaxies, other dimensions, other ways of existence entirely. Humanity was their first contact with your galaxy, their test of whether your civilizations were ready to join the larger universe. The revelation hit June like a physical blow. We weren't just rejecting humanity, we were rejecting contact with all of this? Yes, humanity served as ambassadors, scouts, and bridge builders. We were meant to gradually introduce galactic civilization to the larger community of sentient life. Your reaction to us determined whether that introduction would continue. They were shown records of civilizations spanning dozens of galaxies, connected by technologies and philosophies that made galactic achievements look like the work of children, trade networks that spanned millions of light years, research projects that involved reshaping reality itself, cultural exchanges between beings so different that they barely shared the same concept of existence. This is what we offered, Hound said simply. This is what fear and prejudice rejected. Ambassador Crix, who had been silent throughout the tour, finally spoke. We made a mistake. A terrible, catastrophic mistake? Can it be corrected? Hound considered the question carefully. That depends on what you have learned. The galaxy is currently experiencing the consequences of rejecting diversity and cooperation. Has that experience taught you anything? Our civilization is collapsing, June said bluntly. Billions have died, worlds have gone dark. Everything we built is falling apart without human knowledge and innovation. Yes, Hound agreed. That was inevitable once you chose fear over friendship. But has the experience changed how your people think about difference and diversity? The question hung in the air as the expedition members considered their response. They had come hoping to negotiate humanity's return, but it was becoming clear that this was not a negotiation between equals. This was a test, and their answers would determine not. Yejin Han stood in the empty streets of New Centauri and watched the last lights go out. 5 years had passed since humanity's departure, and she was one of perhaps 1,000 survivors on a world that had once housed 50 million people. The final shutdown had happened exactly as the decoded messages had predicted. At precisely the calculated moment, every piece of human technology throughout the galaxy had simply stopped working. Power grids failed. Communication networks went silent. Life support systems shut down. Transportation ceased. In a single instant, the technological foundation of galactic civilization had vanished, but humanity had kept their promise. At the exact moment the technology failed, a message had appeared on every functioning display screen, been broadcast on every working communication channel, and been transmitted directly into the minds of every telepathic species in the galaxy. The message had been simple, but its implications were staggering. People of the galaxy, the message had begun, you are not alone in the universe. Beyond your space lie civilizations that span thousands of galaxies, connected by principles of cooperation, diversity, and mutual respect. Humanity was sent to serve as your introduction to this larger community. Your treatment of humanity was a test of your readiness to join the galactic community of sentient life. That test revealed that your civilizations value fear over friendship, conformity over diversity, and isolation over cooperation. We now offer you a choice. Learn from the consequences of your actions. Embrace the diversity that you once rejected. Build societies based on cooperation rather than domination. When you have demonstrated that you can treat difference as strength rather than threat, contact will be reestablished. Until then, you are alone with the choices you have made. The message had been accompanied by images and data that proved its claims. Pictures of vast galactic civilizations working together on projects that involved reshaping space and time. Records of peaceful cooperation between species so different that they barely shared the same concept of reality. Evidence of technologies that could provide unlimited energy, perfect health, and expansion beyond the boundaries of known physics, all of it available to civilizations wise enough to value diversity over conformity. The reaction to the message had varied dramatically. Across the galaxy, Some worlds had immediately tried to send responses, attempting to convince humanity that they had learned their lesson. Others had dismissed the message as propaganda or trickery. Still others had concluded that if they could not have human technology, they would rebuild their civilizations without any outside help at all. The Jinn had been on New Centauri when the message arrived, working as a cultural historian trying to document the collapse of galactic society. She had watched her world's government debate for days about how to respond, while around them the infrastructure continued to crumble. "We should send a formal apology," argued Counselor Veth.